Okay, time to get started now as we begin to discuss line graphs. Pretty simple stuff. I would say the most challenging thing about a line graph is a little later on we're going to do a polygon graph, and there's a slight difference between the two, and remembering which is important. But for now, not difficult at all. So here's a really straightforward example, pretty much covers everything. In a survey, 40 mothers were asked how many times per week a teenager must be reminded to do his or her chore. Personally, I think that these numbers are way too low. It should be much higher than 5. I mean, you could do it 5 times in an hour with my sons growing up. But anyway, when they asked the 40 mothers, 2 of them said they never have to remind their kids. 5 of them said, once a week. 8 of them twice a week. 14 of them 3 times a week, and so on. And then they plotted the results on the graph that you see below. Okay, now there's a few features of this graph that I want to emphasize. Okay, some important features. One of them is that you always want to make sure that you label the axes, which one is which. So there's the labeling of the axes right there. And the second thing is, you don't absolutely have to do it, but it's very helpful to include a scale. If you don't include a scale, then you have to, in some way, shape, or form, mark the height. So I would always make it a point to include a scale. And there's your scale. On the vertical axis, it goes to 16. On the horizontal, it goes to 6. All right, so those are very important things. The last thing that I want to put down and mention here, it's an item for later comparison when we get to polygon graphs. Lines do not extend to the axis on a line graph. What I mean by that is, look right here. See how we're not going down to 0? And we're not going down to 0 here, okay? It's important to notice that on a line graph. Now, could it go to 0 if in the frequency table it said 0? Absolutely. But you're not going to complete the graph by drawing to the axis as you do many other graphs. All right, so there's an example of a line graph. Let's have you do a line graph for this one. And we will do stop and start. Go ahead. There's your correct answer. Notice I have the axes labeled. I have the scales drawn on. I do not extend the lines to 0. And then I mark the points and put them in there. Okay? Pretty straightforward, I think. Next up, when I say axes labeled, that's with frequency and number of times in the shop. And here's the points mattered. 0 went with 7. 1 went with 10. 2 with 14. And 3 with 9. It is okay to write a 0 just to the right of where the 0 begins here, as long as you have it labeled. I didn't really like it, and I wasn't going to put it there. That's the part that was scribbled out. But I did find examples in the book, so it is okay to do. Now, those are line graphs. Next up, bar graphs. Bar graphs, note that the bars must be separate on a bar graph. We will study histograms later, and in histograms, the bars connect, okay? So the bars must be separate. And as we take a look here, you see some age groups, you see the number of Facebook users, and then the proportion of each that are Facebook. The proportion of each that are Facebook users, and they're marked off. Now, let's do some observations here. Like the line graph, the axes have to be labeled. So that's over here, proportion and ages. The scale is included, just like a line graph. So whether you're doing a line graph or if you're doing bar graphs, you want to have some kind of scale in there on the vertical axis so you can tell what the height is. The bars do not connect. I can't emphasize that enough. On a histogram, they do. On a bar graph, they do not. The bars are shaped like rectangles. Shading of the interior of the bars, in this case, filling in with the purple there, some kind of marking, it gives you the best perspective. And the bars can either be horizontal or vertical. I could turn the graph so that these bars run horizontally either way, okay? Here's one for you to do. Bar graph time. Go ahead. Okay, I assume you're all finished up. And there's my bar graph. Notice the axes labeled, age groups, percent of population, or proportion of population. The graph as a whole has the title, age groups in the population. And what you notice here is, because I sketched this out, just to be clear what the height is, I put the little number of the height inside of it. 19, 43, 38, and so on. and a little bit of shading there. Okay, so that covers all of what we thought were the most important things to have in a bar graph. Okay, here's another one for you to try to do. Okay, it is stop and start, but keep in mind with this particular graph, what we're looking to graph is the AP examinee population, not the overall student, the column about AP examinee. Okay, so here's a bar graph done for that. Notice in this case, they did not put a scale on the left, but in lieu of a scale on the left, they put the exact values above each bar. Another acceptable way to do it. Personally, I like to do both because I really want to be clear that I have everything taken care of. Okay? Notice, of course, the labeling of the axes. All right. And another example to look through here. This time, oh, it's the same slide. I don't know why it did that. All right, not a problem. Same exact slide, all done. Okay. All right. So now we have a mental stretch question for you to work on. A little bit of a do it now problem. This kind of summarizes everything we've been working on. It says here that Park City is broken down into 6 voting districts. The table below shows the percent of the total registered voter population that lives in each district, as well as the percent total of the entire population that lives in each district. It is very important for you to understand what they want. They want this. Construct a bar graph that shows the registered voter population by district. Registered voter population is the first column, well, not district column, but the middle column there, registered voter population. Go ahead, fill this one out, and I will put the correct answer up in just a minute. There you go. Okay. Notice the axes labeled. Notice the bars drawn. I did include the scale. And as I said before, I like to do, not mandatory, but I like to do, I also put the value of each inside each bar. Remember, we're doing the registered voter population, which is the middle column. That's why it's 15.5, 12.2, 9.8, and so on. Okay, so we have covered line graphs. We have covered bar graphs. Next up, histograms, frequency polygons, and we really don't do a lot with time series graphs. Okay.